Hello everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here. Summa Trigorum, Summa Spoilerum, Summa Tangentum. I've been reading a Marvel Comics adaptation of the Screwtape Letters, and I've been preparing to do a series where I read the original book, The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, and it'll be a combo review of C.S. Lewis's book and a review of the comic as an adaptation. I'll talk about what I learned from the chapter, and then I'll talk about how the comic artists adapted the chapter and how successful I think it is. Because I'm really interested in comics which adapt previous works of literature, like Classics Illustrated, and how they go about representing sometimes abstract ideas in pictures. That's not going to be this video. That's going to be a series of videos later talking about the comic. This is going to be a focus on C.S. Lewis's preface for the Screwtape Letters, which they just published in this as it was in the original book. I think they didn't illustrate it or anything. And the reason I thought of this was I was already thinking about a lot of the content in this essay and how important it is. But today on Twitter, I was watching an interaction, and something I thought of, which is this. SJWs rely upon people having different rules for dialogue in different settings, and they will abuse this. So the clearest illustration I can think of this is called code switching. When I was young, I was given a book about how to be good at socializing with other teens, and there was this chapter on code switching where the idea is you talk to your peers differently than you talk to your grandma, differently than you talk to your teacher, and differently than you talk to a baby. You speak differently in different contexts. And what social justice warriors will rely upon is taking something out of context that can be made to seem nasty or inappropriate in another context. And sometimes it is, sort of risque humor or, guys being salty with each other in the comment section. But what is being missed is that people joking around on a forum online is not the same thing as talking with your grandmother or your relatives at dinner. An insult over your preferred video game is not the same as an insult to your family member to your face. That's one of the reasons why famously comment sections will devolve into a lot of name calling or allusions to Adolf Hitler, even over really innocuous topics. But I guess the only point I want to make is that arguing online is sort of like chatting with your friends at the dinner table, and you're making fun of each other a little bit, and you're being a little salty, and you're being a little blunt. And talking in an elite institution where you're giving a presentation or talking with your grandmother is very different. And what SJWs rely upon is their ability to manipulate this problem. They'll take the salty or sort of jocular comment, and then they'll blow that up as if you were making a straightforward statement, or as if your joke represents a concrete or coherent philosophy of the world that you're advocating for. And it's not. You're joking around online. So I had that thought, but that wasn't enough for a video, because that's the thought. You don't need to stretch that out 10 minutes. Now that I've given you that thought as sort of a preface, my preface to the preface, let's look at the C.S. Lewis's preface to the Screwtape Letters. I like the Screwtape Letters even more than the Chronicles of Narnia as just a completely fascinating work of is it fiction or nonfiction? It's fiction in the sense that he's imagining characters, but it's nonfiction in the sense that he's using his demonic characters to present very fascinating philosophical ideas. If you are an atheist and you've just recently jumped on board the Jordan D. Peterson bandwagon, I'd highly recommend this to you, because I'm a Christian, and I think C.S. Lewis was an Orthodox Christian in the sense that he believed that Satan is real. But he's also using the Screwtape Letters to communicate very thoughtful and very deep ideas about the nature of evil and how evil functions in real life. So if you think that this is just sort of like another kind of Chronicles of Narnia style, cheesy Christian book, it's not that. This is a very fascinating work for thinking about the nature of evil. So with that, let's dive in. It was during the Second World War that the letters of Screwtape appeared in the now extinct Guardian. I hope they did not hasten its death, but they certainly lost it one reader. A country clergyman wrote to the editor, withdrawing his subscription on the ground that much of the advice given in these letters seemed to him not only erroneous, but positively diabolical. So because C.S. Lewis writes about characters who are devils in the Screwtape letters, a country clergyman took that to be an endorsement of devils, not a use of devils as fictional characters to convey a good idea. The commonest question is whether I really believe in the devil. Now, if by the devil you mean a power opposite to God and, like God, self-existent from all eternity, the answer is certainly no. There is no uncreated being except God. God has no opposite. No being could attain a perfect badness opposite to the perfect goodness of God. For when you have taken away every kind of good thing, intelligence, will, memory, energy, and existence itself, there would be none left of him. So what C.S. Lewis is defining here is his view that the devil is not existential evil. Evil doesn't have substance in the way that good has substance. Evil is the absence of a good thing. And the devil, by being by having the absence of good, that does not make him the bad God, equal and opposite to the real God. The proper question is whether I believe in devils. I do. That is to say, I believe in angels. And I believe that some of these, by the abuse of their free will, have become the enemies to God and, as a corollary, to us. These we may call devils. They do not differ in nature from good angels, but their nature is depraved. Devil is the opposite of angel, only as bad man is the opposite of good man. Satan, the leader or dictator of devils, is the opposite not of God, but of Michael. It should be, but it is not, unnecessary to add that a belief in angels, whether good or evil, does not mean a belief in either as they are represented in art or literature. So sort of the Sunday school presentation of an angel with pretty wings and white robes. Devils are depicted with bats' wings and good angels with birds' wings, not because anyone holds that moral deterioration would be likely to turn feathers into membrane, but because most men like birds better than bats. They are given wings at all in order to suggest the swiftness of unimpeded intellectual energy. Creatures higher in the natural order than ourselves, either incorporeal or animating bodies of a sort we cannot experience, must be represented symbolically if they are to be represented at all. Excellent. This is an example of C.S. Lewis expressing why angels and devils are portrayed the way they are in art and literature. And I think it's noteworthy that the artists of Marvel Comics, when they chose to draw devils, sort of drew them as hideous, warty things that you might expect in Mephisto's realm in a Marvel superhero comic book. They represented these ideas symbolically, and they used kind of the images of beauty and ugliness to represent that difference. But just because artists do that doesn't mean people believe it literally exists that way. Some people might erroneously come to that conclusion if they look at the painting and think, oh, that must be what angels and devils look like. But if you're going to represent these ideas, you have to use symbols to represent the idea. The literary symbols are more dangerous because they are not so easily recognized as symbolical. Those of Dante are the best. Before his angels we sink in awe. His devils, in their rage, spite, and obscenity, are far more like what the reality must be than anything in Milton. Now, this makes me feel bad because I've read a little of Dante and a little of Milton, but so I can't speak from having read their full works. I've only read like a few chapters or excerpts of Dante and Milton. But Dante wrote, let me think, the Divine Comedy, I think, which, and we get the idea of the nine levels of hell from Dante. And Milton wrote Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, and it's in very high language, and it follows the character of Satan. And even though Satan is evil, Satan is the protagonist of Milton's poem. So the contrast that Lewis is making is that he likes Dante because Dante sort of portrays devils as sort of spiteful and obscene, and Milton's devils are very intelligent and intellectual. They speak in very high language. Milton's devils, by their grandeur and high poetry, have done great harm, and his angels owe too much to Homer and Raphael. But the really pernicious image is Goethe's Mephistopheles, ironically a Marvel character now, but he's referring to the character from Dr. Faust, not the Marvel character. It is Faust, not he, who really exhibits the ruthless, sleepless, unsmiling concentration upon self, which is the mark of hell. The humorous, civilized, sensible, adaptable Mephistopheles has helped to strengthen the illusion that evil is liberating. This is a really important paragraph because this is Lewis defining different styles of representing evil in literature. So if Milton represents a very intellectual and beautiful vision of evil, then Goethe represents sort of a whimsical and mischievous, impish version of evil. The devil more as Rumpelstiltskin, a trickster, than the devil as the biblical character. Something that really struck me about this is I've always kind of had the thought that there's the famous saying, the devil comes clothed in white. So the devil, in trying to deceive you, will put on an idea of beauty or an idea of sophistication. But what Lewis is contrasting here is that he doesn't think that the devil is a intelligent, beautiful sort of character. He thinks that if you're motivated by pride, then the humor and the whimsy of the mischievous devil wouldn't really make sense. Atheist, hanging with me here. If the devil exists and the devil's principal sin is pride, then that means he has a character. And prideful characters are not marked by their sort of good cheer and whimsy. So that is how Lewis is making the distinction between the devil he's talking about and the devil of popular folklore, in a red suit trying to trick little Johnny into giving him his soul over a violin battle. A little man may sometimes avoid some single error made by a great one, and I was determined that my own symbolism should at least not err in Goethe's way, for humor involves a sense of proportion and a power of seeing yourself from the outside. SJWs do not have a sense of humor. Why do they not have a sense of humor? Because to have a sense of humor, you have to be able to look at yourself. You have to kind of look at yourself and laugh at yourself a little bit and how you screw up. And if you're motivated by pride, you can't do that. Whatever else we attribute to beings who sin through pride, we must not attribute this, meaning a sense of humor. We must picture hell as a state where everyone is perpetually concerned about his own dignity and advancement, where everyone has a grievance, and where everyone lives the deadly serious passions of envy, self-importance, and resentment. I read this paragraph and I had a flashback to my experience in a progressive art school, where everyone is constantly looking for a reason to one-up one another. Everyone is constantly looking for a cause celeb to get behind and to bash other people for not being a good enough ally for. Oops, you use Z instead of V or they. You're not using the correctly updated pronouns as of last week. Let's read this again, because what Lewis is describing here in talking about devils in hell is actually describing the mental state of a person who does not look at themselves with a sense of good humor, with enough of a sense of humility that they can critique themselves. So what does this type of person, what does this kind of community do? A state in which everyone is perpetually concerned about his own dignity. I am a good social justice warrior. I'm a good advocate of justice and advancement. I want to work in a place where I can be an advocate of social justice, where everyone has a grievance. I am this, this, this. I have this marginalized identity. I have that marginalized identity. You need to check your privilege and recognize how put upon I am in white cis heteronormative patriarchy for having a marginalized identity. And where everyone lives the deadly serious passions of envy, I want what the 1% has, self-importance, I'm super smart, and you have to take these social justice concepts very seriously, and resentment. Dang it, this is everything that's been happening to Ethan Van Sciver. He makes beautiful art, he tells a few jokes, and these nobodies, these people who can't draw, these people who haven't accomplished anything, are trying to tear him down over nothing because they resent what he's accomplished. He's accomplished something that they haven't. And it becomes important to tear someone down if pride is the motivation of your worldview and how you want to feel self-worth. If your idea of self-worth is pride, then you have to have more pride than someone else. If they have accomplished more than you, then rather than celebrate and imitate that, you have to tear them down and destroy them so that you can feel bigger. You can only feel good about yourself by destroying others who make you feel bad about yourself by virtue of the amazing things they're doing. So, continuing with Lewis. This to begin with. For the rest, my own choice of symbols depended, I suppose, on temperament and on the age. So Lewis is saying, he's kind of humbly describing himself as a little man compared to great giants of literature like Dante and Milton. But he's saying, I want to err on the side of Dante and avoid the error of Goethe. I want to avoid presenting evil as sort of cutesy and whimsical and charming. I like bats much better than bureaucrats. The greatest evil is not now done in those sordid dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint. It is not done even in concentration camps and labor camps. In those we see its final result, but it is conceived and ordered, moved, seconded, carried, and minuted in clean, carpeted, warm, and well-lighted offices by quiet men with white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to raise their voice. Hence, naturally enough, my symbol for hell is something like the bureaucracy of a police state or the offices of a thoroughly nasty business concern. So, this is important too, because drawing from my experience in a social justice environment, there's a lot of well-to-do-ishness about it. There's a lot of proper pronouns and proper terminology. Don't say mankind, it's person-kind. Don't say policeman, it's police person or Congress person. And these sort of rules, these rules function like rules of civility or rules of politeness. But what they really function for is to kind of create a politically correct. Politically correct is the correct word for it. You have to create a sense of political correctness where you have to speak correctly in order to be included in the little group. And the little group is openly and very forcefully seeking social justice as their end. But their personal concerns are still there. Their personal pride and their desire to advance in that environment is still there. And Lewis is sort of imagining Satan's pride as this little bureaucracy where the Nazis are planning out mathematically what the concentration camp will look like, and not a sort of dramatic Charles Dickens style den of thieves, with musty smoke everywhere. He's identifying evil as sort of stuffy and boring and a tightwad. You gotta stick up its what. That's how Lewis is imagining satanic evil, and it's really interesting. I guess one thing I'd fault the art of this book for is it still uses very kind of over-the-top, monstrous evil, when I think the perfect illustration for what Lewis was going for was sort of stuffy British aristocrats in an office setting. And I kind of wish they'd gone with that aesthetic since he explicitly describes it in his preface, but I'll forgive it. I'll save talking about the art for another day. So, everyone wishes, everyone else is discrediting, demotion and ruin. Everyone is an expert in the confidential report, the pretended alliance, the stab in the back. Over all this, their good manners, their expressions of grave respect, their tributes to one another's invaluable services form a thin crust. Every now and then it gets punctured and the scalding lava of their hatred spurts out. SJWs always turn on each other. Look at this. Okay, so atheists, you're with me? C.S. Lewis is describing his vision of hell. And I see that what I see here is Marvel Comics wrote a comic book about the Screwtape Letters, which would describe the situation at Marvel Comics 20 some years later when SJWs took over. It was a fun, happy place back then. And now it's literally paralleling C.S. Lewis's description of hell. Everyone's tearing each other down. Everyone's afraid of each other. They'll talk a good talk about how wonderful their allies are, but they're looking for an opportunity to stab someone in the back and advance. They want to be the most woke. They want to be the best ally of social justice. And so they'll make a big show of respect. But that's a thin veneer. It's a thin crust, and then like a volcano, the thin crust gets punctured, and the lava of anger and you're a Nazi, you're alt-right comes pouring out. This symbol also enabled me to get rid of the absurd fancy that devils are engaged in the disinterested pursuit of something called evil. The capital is essential. So evil as a concrete material goal, evil for the sake of evil. And Lewis is saying, no, they're not pursuing evil for the sake of evil. They're pursuing something understandable. Mine, meaning his devils, have no use for any such turnip ghost. Bad angels, like bad men, are entirely practical. They have two motives. The first is fear of punishment. For as totalitarian countries have their camps for torture, so my hell contains deeper hells, its houses of correction. The Human Resources Office. Their second motive is a kind of hunger. I feign that devils can, in a spiritual sense, eat one another and us. Boy, I spend too much time on DeviantArt. My first thought is kind of those weird, creepy drawings of people eating each other on DeviantArt. But what Lewis is saying is he's describing a kind of spiritual idea that's kind of difficult and not very concrete. There's a spiritual sense in which devils can eat one another, and they get a kind of sadistic pleasure from it. But it doesn't kill you. I think some of Lewis's beliefs were a little unusual to C.S. Lewis, but I think he held to sort of an orthodox position that the soul is immortal, that the soul can't be destroyed. So when he's saying that the devils are eating each other or eating us, I don't think he's saying that they're literally eating you and killing you. I think he's using the idea of eating as a metaphor for a kind of torture or a kind of pleasure they get at someone else's expense. So they gain sustenance from it. You are hurt and you gain misery from being eaten, but you're not literally eaten and die from the experience. I don't know why he didn't use the term sadism. He had the term available for him, so I'm guessing that C.S. Lewis didn't use the term sadism because he thought his eating metaphor is a better illustration of this concept. But the easiest thing for me to remember is it's something like sadism. So these devils in Lewis's imagination are motivated by sadism. They eat each other. And for a social justice warrior, there's an intense kind of pleasure in tearing someone else down. You have gained at their expense. There's a delight in tearing them down. Even in human life, we have seen the passion to dominate, almost to digest one's fellow, to make his whole intellectual and emotional life an extension of one's own, to hate one's hatreds and resent one's grievances and indulge one's egoism through him, as well as through oneself. His own little store of passion must of course be suppressed to make room for others. If he resists this suppression, he is being very selfish. So I want to be in charge. You're going to do what I say. And if you resist, my dominance, you're the problem, not me. Oh my gosh, this is SJW Twitter all over. The names of my devils have excited a good deal of curiosity, and there have been many explanations, all wrong. The truth is that I aimed merely at making them nasty, and here I am perhaps indebted to Lindsay by the sound. Once a name was invented, I might speculate like anyone else, and with no more authority than anyone else, as to the phonetic associations which cause the unpleasant effect. I fancy that Scrooge, Screw, Thumbscrew, Tapeworm, and Red Tape all do some work in my hero's name, Screwtape, Uncle Screwtape, and that Slob, Slobber, Slubber, and Gob all have gone into Slubgob, right? So he's while making up fanciful names for his devils, he's listening to the sounds and thinking a bit about the associations, like a good writer. He's a good fantasy writer. I was often asked or advised to add to the original letters, but for many years I felt not the least inclination to do it. Though I had never written anything more easily, I never wrote with less enjoyment. The ease came no doubt from the fact that the device of diabolical letters, once you have thought of it, exploits itself spontaneously. It would run away with you for 1,000 pages if you gave it its head. But though it was easy to twist one's mind into the diabolical attitude, it was not fun, or not for long. The strain produced a sort of spiritual cramp. The work into which I had to project myself while I spoke through Screwtape was all dirt, grit, thirst, and itch. Every trace of beauty, freshness, and geniality had to be excluded. It almost smothered me before I was done. So he's describing how it's almost wearisome on the soul to inhabit an evil character well, because the evil character's thoughts have to become your thoughts as you write them, and you have to expel good thoughts from your mind to write the evil character correctly. And this gets old and it gets tiresome. I've experienced that. By the way, if you're a Tolkien fan, read you some C.S. Lewis, because I think C.S. Lewis becomes more interesting the more you read of Tolkien, and Tolkien becomes more interesting the more you read of C.S. Lewis. The Tolkien Professor on iTunes has some great free lectures on the subject, but every time I read these, I also think of, how Tolkien would inhabit his world, and the character of Sauron, and how he's a representation of the unknown. I love comparing and contrasting Lewis and Tolkien's views of writing. I had, moreover, a sort of grudge against my book for not being a different book which no one could write. Ideally, Screwtape's advice to Wormwood should have been balanced by archangelical advice to the patient's guardian angel. Without this, the picture of human life is lopsided. But who could supply the deficiency? Even if a man, and he would have to be far better man than I, could scale the spiritual heights required, what answerable style could he use? For the style would really be part of the content. Mere advice would be no good. Every sentence would have to smell of heaven. And nowadays, even if you could write prose like Treherne's, boy, I feel illiterate reading Lewis. I have no idea who Treherne is. You wouldn't be allowed to, for the canon of functionalism has disabled literature for half its functions. At bottom, every ideal of style dictates not only how we should say things, but what sort of things we may say. C.S. Lewis. So he's essentially describing himself as not being up to the task. And if you had a angelic version of the Screwtape Letters, the problem is that every sentence would have to not just be good advice, it'd have to have almost this divine spark of wisdom to it. And I can understand the sort of Christian hesitance to do that, because it would sort of feel like you're declaring yourself to be God or divinely inspired to write something like the angelic counterpoint to the Screwtape Letters. It's easier to kind of think about badness or think about selfishness than it is to be up to the task of writing a book that's entirely about selflessness, about the idea of the good, about resisting evil. But he did that to an extent in the Chronicles of Narnia. They're books about good versus evil. But what's completely fascinating about the Screwtape Letters is what a commitment this is on Lewis's part to inhabiting the mind of an evil person, and not just making that a straw man of evil. Mwahaha, we're gonna get that Christian with those bad comic books and video games. Mwahaha. It's not that portrait of evil. This is a intense, psychologically meaningful portrait of evil, where you can look at that and you think, oh man, I've thought this way. I've used these kinds of arguments to justify me being a bad person and being selfish and putting others down. That's what makes the Screwtape Letters, the original book, hit home. And I have a feeling my review of the comic is going to give us a little some of the impact that Lewis brought in his book. The Chronicles of Narnia are great. The Screwtape Letters is one of the greatest works in the English language I've ever read. So that is the preface. I think I communicated the connection I see to SJW Marvel. SJW Marvel! Gotta get that in the title somehow. But hopefully you saw that too. Lewis is describing a portrait of hell, which describes selfishness as the primary motivation and goal of the devils in hell, not just a sort of melodramatic view of evil for evil's sake. And this creates a sort of prideful, proper, genteel environment that's a thin veneer for the anger and the resentment that's bubbling underneath. Fabulous. Can't wait to dig in. I love you guys, and I'll catch you later.